Mega Man 2 for the NES is at this point one of the more iconic entries in the series, if not the most iconic. It's at least right up there with X1 in terms of the sheer impact it had on gamers initially and retrospectively. I mean, while I personally find it to be one of the weaker entries in the series due to only really being an improvement of the first game and nothing more, there's no denying it set some of the core standards for the classic and even the X series. From selecting 8 bosses right at the start, having 8 additional weapons from the defeated stage bosses, and then getting a map of the villain's fortress, which you progress in a linear fashion using all you know to beat these remaining levels. And despite the game's flaws, it's still kind of a blast to play to this day, I'm not gonna lie. But we're not here to talk about the NES version, no. Instead, we're going to talk about the other Mega Man 2, the one for the Game Boy. Oh, hello everyone, Alec Elger the SideQuest Gamer here, and welcome to part 2 of my Mega Man Game Boy retrospective, where I'll be looking at what is said to be the black sheep of the series. Is it necessarily deserving of that title? Well, I'd like to take a look at it and see for myself. Oh, by the way, I hope you like the gaming chair I got. It was over $100, but it's going to last a long time, and I hope you like it because it's going to be in every video from here on out.
Who cares? Just start the video already.
Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, the Game Boy game that seemed to leave a bigger impression on Game Boy collectors than the fanbase itself. While developer Minakuchi Engineering had a flawed but alright first entry, back then it seemed to sell well enough to warrant a sequel, and critics seemed to like it as well. And so Mega Man 2 was created, or Mega Man II, as I like to call it. Yeah, don't ask. But the real question is, if the original was enough of a hit, why did the publisher Capcom hire a new developer instead of getting Minakuchi Engineering back to develop the sequel? Instead of the original developers, development of Mega Man 2 was outsourced to Japan's System House, a developer who isn't really known for anything other than a game called Factory Panic for the Game Gear, and that was released only 2 months before Mega Man 2's Japan release, so as far as Capcom was concerned, they weren't really known for anything. And to this day, this is the only Game Boy game that wasn't developed by Minakuchi, because after Mega Man 2, they brought back Minakuchi Engineering to develop Mega Man 3 and beyond, making me wonder if it's because of the polarizing reception this game received from fans and critics alike. Regardless, it was released in February of 1992 as simply Mega Man 2, as opposed to the Japanese title Rockman World 2, which was released between Mega Man's 4 and 5. But you know what? Forget about my complaining of the Dr. Wily's Revenge subtitle from the previous review as opposed to the Rockman World titles. For all I care, they could call it Dr. Wily's Revenge, or Dr. Wily's Revenge 2. Just something to clearly distinguish the NES games from the Game Boy games. And given how when we started the game, we're only treated to the title screen with an unusually high-pitched chiptune playing, and not some intro to explain the story. And like last time, we have to rely on the power of the internet's PDFs of instructions manuals to at least give us some context of why we're here. And this time, after Dr. Wily was defeated in either Dr. Wily's Revenge or Mega Man 4 NES, it's never really specified, Dr. Light tells Mega Man how Wily has stolen a device known as the Time Skimmer from the Kronos Institute and just simply vanished. He travels 37 years into the future and is planning something. So Mega Man has to battle 4 robot masters from Mega Man 2 NES who are guarding a subterranean passage, which I'm assuming would lead to the Time Skimmer, although it just leads to Dr. Wily's castle, which after beating 4 more robot masters, this time from Mega Man 3 NES, it will lead you to the Time Skimmer, which functions as the final level of the game. This story is really interesting on paper, because like the previous game, all the exposition is from the manual, but it's more interesting in retrospect rather than initially because of the X series not really explaining what happened to classic Mega Man before that series began. But because the game is more focused on gameplay rather than contextualizing the story, it doesn't really go past being just a simple premise. The only thing relevant to time travel is how the second to the last boss, being Quint, is a futuristic version of Mega Man who was reprogrammed by President Wily to do his bidding, but that's not even specified in-game as he's just some guy on a pogo stick and he disappears after defeat rather than being blown up, making it hard to believe that he's the future version of Mega Man because he put up so little of a fight. But given how time travel is such such a small, unemphasized aspect of the game, I suppose I can't fault the game for much other than having the potential to be so much more. I will give credit where credit is due. I love the pantomime cutscenes when they are present, like after storming into Dr. Wily's fortress and Mega Man confronts butt-chin Dr. Wily, he blows up the floor underneath Mega Man and he falls into the Mega Man 3 boss rush room. Like, that's just funny. That is so expected of Dr. Wily to pull off something so cowardly. And let's not forget the ending where Mega Man rides Rush Marine out into space, chasing Dr. Wily, and with the blast of a missile that apparently Rush had. That would have been so useful in other situations. Anyways, he uses a missile to shoot down Dr. Wily, and he dies. I mean, that skull-shaped cloud does kind of imply it, so for all we know, he's dead. He'll probably be fine, because he's got 9 more games and side games to appear in as the main villain. Which makes me wonder, is Dr. Wily even human? I mean, he's probably not an alien like the Mega Man 2 ending suggested before faking it out, but what if he's a robot? You know what, I'm going to make a speculation video on that someday. But scenes like this just beg the question, why couldn't there be more of it? I know development periods for Mega Man games are short, but it's 1992, and Game Boy games are definitely capable of having an intro cutscene. Heck, I'll even settle for still images and text if it was a matter of time management. But it simply wasn't meant to be. I mean, to be fair, the classic Mega Man series was always celebrated for its level design, its progression, and like the weapons you can use against the bosses. You know, that's the fun stuff that we all love classic Mega Man for. But the story still could have been better. Like last time, you can select 4 Robot Master levels from the start. This time, they're revived bosses from Mega Man 2 being Woodman, Metalman, Airman, and Clashman? Just the translation, man. That's just odd. But rather than just beating the 4 Robot Master levels and then proceeding to the final levels, you actually get 4 more Robot Master levels, this time being Robot Masters from Mega Man 3. And this is actually the first entry in the classic series to do the 4x4 method of progression that Mega Man 7 is often credited as being the first in the series to do so. Because while you do eventually have to figure out the remaining 4's weakness chain, you don't have to take a lot of time figuring out where to start among the 8 bosses and narrowing it down to just 4 options, which makes it less intimidating for new players. Now, I don't have a problem with having all 8 Robot Master levels at once. In fact, I personally prefer it since it increases replayability by adjusting to the order you get weapons, as well as the rush or rush-like items, but the 4x4 method and 8 at once method of level progression both have merits to them, and I'm fine with either way. And as for the levels themselves, they're never really frustrating, which makes them kind of a breeze in comparison to Wily's Revenge's levels. But as a fusion of the themes used in Mega Man 2 and 3 with some of its own ideas sprinkled in there, it can be a bit unpolished at times.
Of course not. Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy is an objectively bad video game.
Oh great. It's the Gatekeeper, everyone! Yay! The one guy on the internet that no one likes.
It really doesn't matter if I'm liked or not, because everything I've ever said is fact. I mean, do you think you could possibly contest my opinions? Good luck with that. Really, I mean it.
You know what? We'll see about that. When I say unpolished, I don't mean it's bad, but I don't exactly think it's perfect either. I mean, no game is, but some games are just rough around the edges and you'll have to pick the things you really like and decide whether or not they're worth going through the rough parts for. Like Mega Man 3 can be unpolished at times, like the infamous Doc Robot stages. They feel less thought out in terms of enemy and item placement than the Robot Master stages previously, which makes these Doc Robot stages flawed and less enjoyable than what came before, and definitely what came after. But despite all that, Mega Man 3 is still a good game, even if some of the levels and bosses have noticeable exploits which prevent it from being anything more than just good, at least to me. That's what I'm saying about these levels in particular, except that unlike Mega Man 3 NES, there aren't nearly as many high points in this game to compensate for the instances of unpolished design. Like, take Airman Stage for example. It features the return of these boomerang shooters and giant head platforms that deploy hovering enemies. With the Buster only, you can't get past the launcher without taking some damage, and the giant heads just pop in on screen when you least expect it to, instead of its side being seen from the head you're standing on currently. This may be in part due to the smaller screen resolution, making these levels more compact than the NES counterparts. part, but as a result, it's just an alright level with not much thought put into it. It's probably the least original stage of the first 4 Robot Master stages, while the remaining 3 do borrow a lot from their source material, but add in a few new stage segments to make them stand out. Like Metal Man stage. I like how after getting past the spiked free-falling section, there are 2 conveyor belt platforms that will reward you with extra weapon energy by using the slide move introduced in Mega Man 3, which became a staple of the series until Mega Man 9 decided for some reason it wasn't a good idea for the slide move to be used for Mega Man, and only make it a Proto Man exclusive move. Thank goodness Mega Man 11's giving the slide back to Mega Man, but anyways, this, whether it be intentional or unintentional, is a decent context clue as you may have something to get under that platform. Sure, it doesn't tell you to hold down while pressing A to do so, and some may find themselves trying to use weapons or rush items to retrieve them, but I think most people would accidentally stumble onto this move or figure it out for themselves eventually. I mean, it's not like the Hadouken or the Shoryuken where it's a very precise half-circle motion on the D-pad or even a specific button combination that the game itself doesn't tell you about. But regardless, the game modifies the source material's level design to kind of account for this new move, especially when it's mandatory to progress on further in the level. And despite the spiked free-falling section being a bit of a beginner's trap since the screen doesn't scroll down just to see what's ahead, the checkpoint is right before it, making it less irritating if you mess up once and die. Now, I'm not saying it makes a good game design, but it doesn't make me boil with rage like a drunken college student that just failed the final exam. And this level made me realize just how flawed the hitboxes are in this game when it comes to these Castlevania-styled spike traps that go up and down. Like, I get it's a matter of timing, but the trap was clearly high enough for me to pass under, only for it to kill me for some reason. Stay calm, SKG. It's just a game that cheated me out of a freaking life!
Great game, isn't it? Why are you defending this garbage?
Don't you say another word! But besides that, they were a small part of the level, and the rest is pretty decent. And so is Clashman stage. Yeah, I'm never letting Japan System House hear the end of that translation goof. I mean, sure, if you had the rush jet, you can cheese the platforming section, and even without it, it's just a lot of waiting around on a platform, shooting enemies until you're close enough to jump onto the ladder, but it's still somewhat engaging with this combination, and the second section where you can select one of the 2 diverging paths before going to the third section where you ascend using the platforms on a track once again. It looks very basic, but the level of engagement surprisingly really comes from the risk of being touched by these cylindrical enemies and dropping a few screens down. And by far the best of these 4 stages has to be Woodman stage, because it's a combat-oriented stage with your bats, ostriches, and the mini-bosses being these fire-breathing jaguars. Like, I can comfortably race to the end and have a pretty good time just blasting away at these enemies. And like the one in Mega Man 2, this stage has a pretty surprisingly visual atmosphere to it, whereas you can go from being in a wild forest to underground caverns, and this version even adds in an underground water section, expanding upon the original's atmosphere. I also like how this version of the stage is darker in comparison to the NES original, which was bright and cheery. And while it's just mostly taking out enemies and climbing ladders, the cave section gives you the choice to take on the Mega Man 3 needle obstacles and cannon, or use Rush Marine to skip that entirely, but only if you have the Rush Marine, rewarding players who played this game in a specific order. So yeah, these first 4 Robot Master stages are an improvement over the ones in Wily's Revenge, because they don't ever get frustrating to a blood-boiling point, but they're also a bit on the easy side with not a lot of unique gimmicks or interesting platforming going on. Sometimes there's consequence, but because the levels are more compact, reiterating a lot of Mega Man 2's stage designs didn't always translate well, where once trickier jumps are now effortless. So we head to Dr. Wily's Fortress where we unlock 4 more Robot Master stages, but this time from Mega Man 3 as I said before. By this point you should have Rush Coil, Jet, and Marine by now, as well as Metal Blade, Leaf Shield, Crash Bomb, and Air Shooter, so no longer will these stages be judged by the default weapon alone, and because of having all these weapons at your disposal, the difficulty curve stagnates rather than increase. In fact, I dare argue it decreases at some points. I mean, sure, there are more powerful enemies like the Hammer Joes and the Porcupine type enemies, but the Metal Blade can make short work of them easily without much consequence. I mean, to give credit where credit is due, these stages feel more developed and varied due to being translation of Mega Man 3's Robot Master stages, which already were some of the most celebrated levels in the franchise. Well, excluding Gemini Man stage of course, but don't worry, that's not until the next game. But seriously, Needleman stage has everything I want. A ton of enemies with unique strategies I have to adapt to. There are instances of time jumping and sliding, and even with the weapons you have, you can't really cheat this level out of the challenges it offers. However, Magnet Man and Top Man stages aren't as good, but they do have their high points when it comes to enemy placement. Thing is though, they reintroduced the disappearing platforms from Wily's Revenge, but the problem is, by this point in the game, no matter what route you take, you already have the Rush Jet and Rush Marine powers, meaning you can easily pass this challenge, and in the case of Top Man stage, it's very early in the level where you wouldn't be able to run out of the Rush Marine energy unless you purposely wasted it. So what would increase the difficulty curve is outright ignorable, and in the case of Magnet Man stage, it has a similar problem in the original game where if you went in a certain order and got Rush Jet before playing the stage, you wouldn't have to worry about it. But in this game, no matter what route you take, you will have the Rush Jet beforehand, and that's unfortunately a missed opportunity for otherwise decent stages. Because they do have redeeming value with other obstacles, like how Top Man's level has these cat and yarn ball mini bosses, and the top deploying dudes on the staircases. Like, these are fine challenges that force you to adapt to this new combat scenario. But the weak link of these stages is unfortunately Hard Man. Hard Man? Oh man, I gotta get my mind out of the gutter. I mean, the bear traps are fine, the Hammer Joes are fine, and even the bees that drop hives of smaller bees, those are fine, they're a clever enemy type, but the obstacles themselves besides that are just like any other Mega Man stage, except noticeably have more pace-breaking moments, like these unpredictable gorillas that just never die. I just hate these things so much. And if you're expecting the final level in a space station to be any better, you might be disappointed because it's still the same stagnant difficulty as the previous 9 levels. I mean, there are two things I do like about it though. For one, there's some pretty cool visual imagery of clocks in the background, giving off a very Salvador Dali vibe. I mean, to be fair, if I had a giant mechanical time machine space station with a skull entrance, I'm pretty sure I would have melted clocks painted in the background too. And I also find the stage a lot more enjoyable than the frustration that was the 2 Wily Castle stages in Wily's Revenge. I mean, it's short and doesn't overstay its welcome, even if it's simpler in design. But unfortunately, as the game's final set of challenges, it's almost kind of insulting, like being given a 6th grade algebra test in 9th grade algebra, where the questions are along the lines of 3 plus x equals 7, solve for x. All that work you did before, only to be given something below of what you're capable of, is just disappointing and really insulting. Like, sure, there's disappearing block platforming, but it's much simpler than Mega Man 3's inspired stages before, and there's a mandatory Rush Marine section with nothing but items on the surface that you can collect. You know, the problem with these water sections in Mega Man 2 Game Boy is that they lack spikes or enemies or any kind of challenge that will threaten damage to you, or even outright kill you. Like, come on! Mega Man 2 and 4 did this so much better on the NES, and the 2 falling spike traps and the 1 cloud guide just shows everything is less than what it used to be. And that's a real shame, because overall, the design is never frustrating and never has any absolute low points, but the game just feels like the level design comfortably just sits in the okay to decent range and never does anything more than that. What were once great stages are now bastardized, and the lesser stages in the original games that came over here, they're not much better on the Game Boy version. And the bosses at the end of these levels, let's just say they're like fighting poorly resurrected zombies.
I live again.
Because Wily recommissioned these Robot Masters again, and they fight like they're not even fully awake, Like, I won't deny part of the problem might be how compact the room is in comparison to the spacious NES boss rooms, and so things like jump trajectory might have to be altered, but it's so easy to avoid touch damage with a lot of these bosses, and you can honestly beat them all with just a buster only. Like, the only challenge to that kind of playstyle would be Woodman and Airman's defensive attacks that block projectiles, but even then, with just a few shots of the buster when they let their guard down, they're gone for good. I mean, it's fine for accessibility for new players when it comes to starting the boss order of the playthrough, but if the bosses are kind of a joke with a default weapon, they're an even bigger joke with their weaknesses. I know Mega Man 2 had this problem, but this now carries over to Mega Man 3's bosses. At least Mega Man 2 NES had a harder difficulty mode. Like, Needleman has these fast-acting needle shots and that spike cord attack, and that was fine in the original game, but again, their attack strategies have not translated well on Game Boy hardware. It's weird because I remember bosses like Hardman being the fight of the lifetime, but maybe it's that the invincibility frames have been reduced or he has significantly less HP than before. Like, I don't remember in the original game that he went down with 5 magnets and that's it. While Wily's revenge bosses were occasionally frustrating like Heat Man, 2 Game Boy does the opposite sin of being too easy to the point where not the final challenge you would expect at the end of the level. And as for the fated battle in Wily's Fortress against a reprogrammed future Mega Man now named Quint, I'm just gonna lay it to you straight. He is by far the worst boss battle in the entire Mega Man Game Boy pentology.
That comes as no surprise. I mean, from the worst of the Game Boy Mega Man games, did you honestly expect them to be any good?
Honestly, yes. He was the one boss battle that the game was building up to. At least in the instructions manual, but you get my point.
Oh, so naive, SideQuest gamer. I swear, all the SideQuest gamers in the multiverse that I've met in my travels, they're all just blind optimists that don't really see reality for its objective state.
Neither do you, so get off your high horse. Oh boy, Quint, the ultimate 9th robot master. He is so pathetic, I can't even call it a boss battle. All he does is drill holes in the floor that spits rocks in short range, and he tries to touch you with his pogo jackhammer, but he's so easy to dodge it's flat out insulting. And all you have to do is just shoot him with no health bar shown, and he doesn't even die but instead teleports out when you defeat him. Like, what kind of boss battle was that? And we never see him again. No one talks about him, no one mentions him, no one even thinks about him, there's not even a reference to him, except for the end credits enemy showcase. But besides that, he's gone for good. We won't see him until the 5th game. It's also worth noting he's the second of the 4 Mega Man killers. With the first being Anchor, can you honestly blame me for wanting more out of Quint? He should have been an improvement over that boss battle, but this is an outright downgrade in terms of boss design. I just hope Punk, Ballad, and Terra in the following games don't disappoint me. And finally, the 3-phase Dr. Why? What is that? Jeez, is that squished deformed head supposed to be Dr. Wily? Like, he looks half asleep in that cockpit, and fights like it too. But jokes aside, he's actually a decent boss battle. Yeah, first time in the game. It actually progresses a difficulty after 9 levels of stagnation. He launches bombs that you can run under, and spikes you can jump over, with phase 2 making the bouncing bombs explode into 2 diagonal projectiles, which adds more tension, and phase 3 has him in some kind of dinosaur robot where he launches a missile, and the tricky but fair 4 dividing bombs that move downwards. This is honestly everything this game should have had in a boss battle. Like, did the developers finally snap to their senses and make a set of challenges that get harder and harder as you move on to the next one? This is not bad. This is a step in the right direction. I mean, it's kind of too little too late at this point, because after that battle, the ending scene and credits roll, but still, this is what could have been, and it's an unfriendly reminder of what simply wasn't with the majority of these bosses. And as for the weapons gained from the defeated Robot Masters, let's just say they have the exact same problem as Mega Man 2 for the NES, except a lot worse in some areas. Remember the overpowered Metal Blade? Well, it's back, and it functions exactly the same as it did in the original Mega Man 2, being a 7-directional projectile blade that has low energy consumption and can take out a lot of enemies, both small and big. And due to the high rate of fire, it sure made short work out of those Jaguar mini-bosses in Woodman stage. Like, why would you want to use any other weapon with this much power? But there are other good weapons in this game, thankfully, like the Leaf Shield for example. It functions as both a shield that you can use against small enemies like the bees, or just use as a projectile, but I usually just end up finding more use as a defensive shield weapon than as an offensive one, because its damage output is a bit too low for my liking. And the needle cannon has a good rate of fire and fires in a straight line, but it doesn't kill every enemy, as some of them are just immune to it, where the needles just bounce off them as soon as they make contact, and therefore balancing it out. And I also really like the magnet missile, since it homes in on airborne enemies in an L-shaped arc, but it has a moderate energy consumption, so you can't just spam it without consequence. And the air shooter, it's fine with its upward trajectory that has 3 dividing mini tornadoes, but unfortunately, that just leaves us with 4 out of the 9 weapons that I didn't find much use for in this game. The hard knuckle, which is an airborne fist you can control, I only really felt the need to use it against the boss it's weak to. Same goes for the crash bomb, which is a deployable bomb that you can remote detonate, but unlike Mega Man 2 and 3, there's no alternate paths or blockades to use either of those to unlock rewards with, which makes them even less situational than before. And the top spin, my god, it is so useless. Like, I had no use for it in my playthrough since I beat the boss it was vulnerable to beforehand. I suppose that's my fault, but the weapon simply wasn't designed beyond its situational use, and there's not really a final boss that has a one-hit weakness to somehow redeem it. And let's not forget about Quint's pogo jackhammer called the Saku game. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The final boss is technically weak to it, but it's so awkward to control. I just end up taking more damage than I am dealing it, thanks in part to the weird hitboxes, so I just ended up using the default buster weapon instead, therefore making this jackhammer pogo stick obsolete. They really screwed up with this new weapon. They honestly should have designed the final stage around this new weapon. And that leaves us with the 3 helpful items that make and break the game. Rush Coil is the spring used to get to higher places, and I don't really have much to complain about with its inclusion in the game. But as I said before, Rush Marine is used to take the easy way out of disappearing platforms for Top Man stage, as well as for the turrets and spikes section of Woodman stage. It's not that this item is a cheap tool to use. I mean, it's great in Mega Man 4 for the NES because they actually designed the water level around it with one-hit kill obstacles to make sure your underwater journey isn't without some challenges. It just only makes movement a little easier, but emphasis on a little. It really doesn't help that this game came after Mega Man 4, so I'm definitely not using hindsight logic in this case when expressing my outright disappointment with its inclusion. And Rush Jet, it just outright breaks stages like Magnet Man's because it's a combination of the item's function and the level design. If you can just fly anywhere without limitations such as constantly moving without being able to turn back like the sequels do later, the way it functions here is very reminiscent of Mega Man 3 for the NES, and as a result, it can be very easy to play through these levels, even more so thanks to the compact level design, making you skip challenges that Japan's System House just put there. And again, I understand you can just not use it, but that's no excuse. And that's Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy. A lot of it is fine for the most part, but it just feels like an alright game being held back by its unpolished nature, preventing it from being anything more than alright. There's a good game in there, but unfortunately it's buried underneath all those major exploits and oversights. Don't mistake this as hate, I'm mainly pointing out observations I've made about my experience with this game, especially in comparison to the rest of the series. The sprite work is mostly fine, with exceptions being the sprite of Cockpit Dr. Wily, and there are some oddities with the art style, mainly being how static and boring the backgrounds are, with the exception of Woodman's and the Time Skimmer. The animations aren't that impressive either, like there's no Dr. Wily begging for mercy animation that every classic Mega Man game has, which is a bit disappointing, I'll have to admit. And as for the music, my god, they really messed up big time, because a lot of the chiptunes have awesome melodies like the title theme, which is also the theme of the final level, by the way. Metal Man's theme has an interesting techno-industrial feel to it. Woodman even has a rocking main melody with one decent backing melody to go with it. Airman's theme has a funny, happy-go-lucky vibe that oddly reminds me of Crash Team Racing's credits theme. I know that's odd, but this game came before it, so I'm not going to accuse that of plagiarizing. Although I did notice some of the themes feel derivative of the title theme's melody. Not that I have a problem with that, Crash Man and Needleman's stage themes being examples, but other themes like Top Man's, Magnum Man's, and especially the stage select theme, they're really annoying. I just want to break the handheld listening to it.
God, my ears are big red.
Oops, sorry, forgot this was a family-friendly show, but 90% of these tracks has a universal problem that really is a deal breaker, including the ones with melodies I liked. Most of them have really bad percussion that sounds like constant hissing that just overpowers the main melody, which is one of the biggest slaps in the face to music aficionados. I can only think of a few examples where it's not effective, like Quint's theme. It has an unpleasant vibe building up to the battle ahead, like you know you're in an evil lair while listening to it. And I suppose the boss theme isn't the worst thing in the world either. It's frantic and fast-paced even if it loops quickly, and the staff roll theme is kind of a dreamy composition. It just makes you reflect on the adventure you had before. And really, reflecting on my time with these 9 levels in Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy, it was really easy to point out obvious things that could have been improved upon. Despite this game feeling like a cheap entry made by a fan game designer who made this like their first project, I still maintain that it was a more enjoyable experience than Wily's Revenge. So overall, I would rank this game as an okay game. It's definitely not the worst classic Mega Man game I've ever played. It's a lot better than some of the other entries, like the DOS games for example. Despite the game's glaring flaws, I honestly never wanted to put the game down. It's short like its predecessor, probably in part due to it being so easy, and everything except for the music is consistently above average to even decent at times. Would I replay this game again? Maybe in a few years to come, but it really comes as no surprise that Japan's System House was not brought back to make a new installment in this Game Boy side series. But if there's anything to take out of this video, I get why some people consider this to be the flawed black sheep of the Game Boy games, even though I don't agree with that colloquialism in its intentional context. Because people use Black Sheep not only to single out a series entry as the odd one out, but also as an undesirable product. But sometimes, for me at least, Black Sheep entries are my cup of tea depending on its merits. There's nothing wrong with black wool after all, it just depends on the factors that went into producing that wool. I do honestly believe that it did improve upon what Wily's Revenge established, even though what came with it are issues of its own.
Haha, you admit that this game has issues. You admitted it on your own review. That's kind of a defense of this game. You admit it. This game is just an objectively bad piece of garbage.
Oh, I never denied Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy had issues, but Wily's Revenge also has issues, and I don't really often hear about those issues in online discussions, and I've only heard some friends kind of share my sentiment. I mean, it's cool if you like Wily's Revenge more than 2. I mean, some people share your sentiment. It's kind of like a pick your poison kind of deal. But still, Wily's Revenge is far from perfect either.
What? 2 is way worse than Wily's Revenge. At least Wily's Revenge doesn't spoon-feed you victories. How can you possibly think that?
If you feel that Mega Man 2 is worse than Wily's Revenge for that reason, you have every right to your opinion. I respect that. I mean, many fans share your sentiment, but the difference between you and them is that they share it in a more civilized manner, while you try to shove your opinions down everyone's throats. And nobody really likes that.
I'm telling you, Psychos Gamer, this review is evidence that you are not a true classic Mega Man fan. You like Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy. You admit it has issues, but yet you still had enjoyment of it. For that, I cannot let you into the Mega Man fandom. I will be guarding these gates from people like you.
I have a better proposal. Why don't you just go away? Or better yet, maybe I'll just block you.
Oh, you're going to block me because I'm just a little bit irritating. Well then, fine. Like your Mega Man 2 for the flawed piece of garbage it is. But I'm telling you, this isn't over. I will not leave you alone for this. Just wait until your Mega Man and Bass review. But I will come back. You can't do this. You can't do this.
Until Part 3 comes out where I take a look at the other Mega Man 3 for the Game Boy. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome.